Hello everyone, and a warm welcome to this KnowTalks session. It is titled Predicting the Unpredictable Through Advanced Data Analytics. So before we start, I would like to extend a big thank you to the team at Mohammed bin Rashid Knowledge Foundation and the United Nations Development Programme for inviting us to speak at one of their KnowTalks webinars. We really appreciate the important work they are doing in providing a global platform to share current knowledge issues and tackle the challenges with workable and practical solutions. Excellent. So, I am your moderator today. My name is Jarred Lloyd. I am a credit risk consultant with 12 years experience, specifically in the banking and financial sector, specializing mostly in analytics. With me today, I'd like to introduce our guest speaker, Zaid Kamhawi. Zaid is the CEO of Qarar, and his long-term vision, innovation, and focus on the company's operations has resulted in significant growth. Zaid has more than 20 years experience in finance analytics, credit management, and consulting. Under his leadership, Qarar has become a major player in advanced analytics in the Middle East. Zaid, welcome.
Thank you, Jarred. Looking forward to our discussion.
Great. Okay, so before we get started, I just want to share a few housekeeping notes with everybody today. Today's discussion, it'll be roughly 30 odd minutes. If we go slightly over, we'll try and keep it at about that. And after that, we will be taking some of the audience's questions. There is a question and answer box that will be open throughout the entire discussion. So please feel free to add any questions there or type any questions during the discussion itself. I'm not exactly sure where your Q&A box is located, but for example, on my screen, it's at the top of my screen. Yours, it might be at the bottom of your screen, so just have a look for that. And then Zaid and I, we both look forward to sharing our insights and comments with you as we go through this presentation. Finally, I just want to inform everybody as well that the session will be recorded and it will be available on the KnowTalks YouTube account. So please subscribe if you haven't already done so. Okay, so just covering today, what will we be discussing? I think it's a very relevant and hot topic that touches everybody's lives, whether we realize it or not. Okay, so it's all about the data nowadays. We've all heard of big data, wide data. It's part of our lives in everything that we do. So we'll be discussing today from its origins to where we are now and what we think we can expect in the future with regards to data analytics and artificial intelligence. So we're going to examine how data is helping us navigate through this current pandemic as well. And then we're going to share some very interesting case studies on how data is currently being used and the extent that it's being used. It's also currently being used by some of our top sports stars in the world today to negotiate salaries, and we'll get into a little bit more detail about that. And I think what's interesting for us to note is if sports stars are starting to use data, then maybe it's something we can all learn from as well. And I mean, if they can do it, why can't we also do it? I see there are a few new joiners. So just want to, there we go. So for those of you who are just joining us now, a very warm welcome to everybody. So yeah, I think let's get going. Predicting the unpredictable through advanced data analytics. That is the topic for today. So Zaid, I think firstly, let's just start by understanding why are we actually talking about this today?
So maybe, Jarred, just a small comment about the title, Predicting the Unpredictable. It is a bold statement, and it does highlight the power that data and analytics have in predicting future events and customer behaviors. But some things will remain unpredictable, you know, like an apocalypse or my wife's mood today. But and I wouldn't be surprised if that too wouldn't be possible in a few years. But to put some context on why we're talking about this and why I am talking about this, as a start, I have been involved in this industry since 2013. With the establishment of one of the first advanced analytics companies in the region, Qarar, with a mandate to establish a analytics center of excellence with the local capabilities. and help businesses solve business problems through data. And we've been very successful in engagements within the financial services sector, telecom, insurance, government in specific. But more importantly, we're talking about this today because AI has had some great success in making an impact in our lives. Everything from playing chess with a machine to solving a pandemic. And the reason why we can do this today is because we have access to so much data, from sensors, from smartphones, online internet interactions, social media posts, and practically every action that we take today is captured in some digital form. And we go about our lives, leaving these digital breadcrumbs along the way, and then organizations can come, and take that information, plug it into a machine learning algorithm, ask it to classify the data or determine certain correlations between these different data sets to be able to predict a specific outcome. And maybe I just noticed that I need to make maybe a disclaimer before we move on, that I tend to use the words advanced analytics, AI, data science, scoring interchangeably, mean more or less the same thing. If we are going to get technical, probably that's not the right thing to do, but for the purpose of this discussion, the idea is behind any AI or machine learning solution is data and an intelligent way to harness that data to make decisions and intelligent predictions. So just a side note here.
No, thank you for that. I think it's an important side note because I also am going to use the word interchangeably. I think when you talk to the data scientists, they would disagree with us most probably on that, and they would like to get very technical about it. But I think for today's purpose, I think it's a great setting the scene that we will be using it interchangeably as we go along in this conversation today. Okay, great. So I mean, that's a nice brief intro there on everything. So I think let's start at the beginning. I mean, how did this all start, in your opinion? I mean, in your experience, where did this all start? And also, how influential is AI actually in our lives today?
So I actually learned this recently, Jarred, that AI started in a math department in 1956 in Dartmouth University. So really, if we want to simplify, AI and machine learning, at its core, it's simply statistics and math, and statistics that's used to, analyze historical trends of data, and then develop algorithms and scores. And these scores score the probability of a future event happening with high predictive accuracy, we must say. And then we base our decisions based on these probabilities, about future events or customer behaviors. And, we've all heard about, the volumes of data that's being generated every day, in the zettabytes. Yeah. So I'm not going to get into that. But that gave rise to the term big data, which in the 1990s referred to the increasing, volume of data that's available. But more recently, that term grew to also include different variety of data or types of data, like voice files, text files, images, social media posts. And also the definition grew to include the ability to process all of that information using high-speed computer processing power. And then all of that together opened the door to more easily, utilize all of this information for analysis and for predictions. And now, we have these algorithms and scores, and they're very influential, as you said, and they're becoming increasingly influential. I mean, we rely on them today, determine if someone's going to pay back his loan. So basically, determine if he's creditworthy or not. They influence how much you would pay on interest on a loan. So I don't know if people, really they realize how much influence these algorithms have on our daily lives. They would influence, the premium that you would pay on an insurance policy. They would determine if you are the best person for a job or the best person to be offered a college or university seat. They can also predict voting outcomes, and in some cases identify what influences a person to vote and drives a person to vote. And I think, you know, the well-known case of Cambridge Analytica during the 2016 US election. And they can influence, you know, even softer issues, you know, like what you see on your social media feed, ads that you're displayed to you. And to me, the most amazing thing is that, you know, all of this happens in real time, you know, and in an automated fashion. So we can, you know, practically make these thousands of decisions, make them consistently, but instantly, you know, and I think that is the power that, you know, lies within AI today. And that's why it's not surprising that, you know, investment in AI is expected to double in the next, you know, 3 to 4 years, you know, from 50 billion to 110 billion, according to one report by IDC. In the Middle East alone, I think there was a report that linked investment in AI, that it will have around $300 billion worth of impact on Middle East economies. If we zoom to Saudi Arabia in specific, you know, they have their 2030 vision. They have 96 strategic goals in that vision, and 70% of these goals are somehow related to AI and data. And in the UAE, we have the Minister of Artificial Intelligence. So that alone is an indication of how influential AI has become.
Yeah. Now, I think that you highlighted some excellent points there. And I mean, I think in everybody's life today, you are using data and analytics, whether we all realize it or not. To your example on whether we're just applying for a loan and the interest rate that gets attached to that loan for us, that is part of using data and analytics, looking at our profiles. And I think the power that you mentioned as well of it being consistent and really quick to actually make these decisions, that is where all the benefits lie in using artificial intelligence, data analytics, and all of that info there. Scary numbers that you're mentioning there, things like doubling from 50 billion to 110 billion in the next 4 years. Those are not small numbers that you're talking about. And there's definitely going to be some huge focus across the different industries on the workforce and how they use data in their journeys going forward. So, I mean, Zaid, I think on top of that then, I just want to ask, in the financial sector itself, I mean, you have been one of the visionary leaders out here in the Middle East and setting up artificial intelligence data and using it. But where have you seen in the financial sector that it's been used the most, and how has that affected our actual customer experience?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, we've done a lot of work in financial services space, and you know, banks and finance companies have traditionally been the biggest beneficiaries or adopters of you know, data and data-driven strategies, because historically maybe a push from the regulators, they needed to kind of harness the power of the data that they have. But I think one of the biggest drivers for you know, acceptance or adoption of AI within the financial services sector is the push for a better customer experience. You know, that we know today that, you know, amazing customer experience is what is expected by the sector, and probably even pushed even further because of the rise of fintechs. So you have these customers with rising expectations. You know, they want to bank anywhere, they want to bank anytime, and you know, we're in this age of instant gratification, which pushed really the banks towards, you know, becoming more digital or adopt digital channels, which enabled them to transform the relationship that they have with their customers today. And AI and data science, you know, played a very, very big role in this. I mean, if we take a typical customer journey, for example, in a bank, we see that data science plays a big role in every part of that journey. So that the bank needs to make a decision about the customer, data science has played a role there. You know, from making sure that the customer is who he says he is, you know, so identity verification, using biometrics, using external data to verify the identity. To identifying the best product for a given customer need, identifying a change in the customer's life. For example, today banks can tell whether a customer, has had a major life event, maybe a birth of a new child, a change in job, maybe some inheritance, and use that information to quickly decide on the right action or the right product to push for that customer. Deciding the best time to call a customer, deciding on what are his hobbies or likes. All of these decisions, along the way, enable the bank to, make the relationship with the customer personal. And they are only able to do that, because they've been able to bring in large, amounts of data as enablers to inform them along the way, along that journey of what action they need to do. And as I mentioned earlier, and you confirmed that, is that the power here is, having this consistent way of making decisions, away from the human bias and doing it, consistently. And even some of these decisions that are taking place today within the banking and financial customer journey are not even possible, by humans alone, because they are so complex and they need so many different types of information that they are not even humanly possible and can only be done by, tools like AI and machine learning solutions. One of the things that, one case study that we kind of saw extensively and worked on extensively is this idea of hyper personalization, where, banks get to identify the right product for the right customer, at the right time. And this for us, is the greatest value proposition, that banks, to me, achieved from AI, because it increases the customer's lifetime value for the bank, it increases the sales turnover, it enhances the customer's experience. And I can give one example of a use case that we worked on, where banks were able to bring in huge amounts of data from external sources, be it credit bureau, government, social media feeds, bring all of this external data in and merge it with internal data that they have about their customers, and then use that information to calculate things like the customer's share of wallet, try to calculate his affordability, what banking products does he have with other banks, what products is he shopping for today, what is his risk profile. So all of these calculations, and remember, they're happening in real time and instantly, they all feed into other models that help the bank to determine this is the right product for this customer, and this is the likelihood that this customer is going to take up that offer if I offer it to him. And you can just imagine how this transforms the whole experience that the customer has with the bank. And it's really the reason why so many banks and financial services executives today say that AI investment or data-driven investment is going to just increase in the next 3 to 4 years.
Yeah, no, look, I can't agree more with what you've said there. And I think from my side as well, just to add to that, you mentioned earlier about the breadcrumbs that we're all leaving with everything that we do in our lives, and it leaves a trail of data and information around who we are and what we are busy going through in our life. So when there is a big life-changing event, you can see it in the data that comes through on where you're shopping, what you're buying, and that definitely gets utilized in banking, where they get to use that data and information to make decisions which will best help the customer. And I think that's one of the important things to note here during our conversation today, is that if this data is used correctly and it is incorporated correctly, it is then beneficial to both the client as well as the banks at the end of the day, because the bank knows exactly who they are dealing with and what they are offering the clients, and the clients will be looking for that kind of fee coming to them then because of the situation they are currently in. So it's important to note that piece as well.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I think we can't get through a conversation today without just discussing COVID-19. I think everybody has spoken about that, and everywhere it gets brought up, whether you're talking about vaccines, whether we're talking about numbers going up, or when's the next lockdown. I mean, it's part of our life at the moment, and it seems to be here for a little bit longer, hopefully not too much longer, but it will still be around for a while. But I thought that maybe you can just share with us, Zaid, in your experience, how AI and data has actually become the forefront of this new world that we're currently living in.
Yeah, and to be honest, Jarred, I mean, this relationship between AI and the pandemic is so interesting to me, because you have these two giants. You have AI on one hand, a major trend and a major enabler on one hand, and then you have the pandemic, also a major event and a life-changing event, and they're both feeding off of each other.
Exactly.
You have the pandemic accelerating the adoption of AI, and you have AI accelerating the tackling of the pandemic.
Exactly.
So it's quite an interesting relationship, and
that is.
And I think we all remember the meme that was circulating at the beginning of the pandemic that asked, who is responsible for your organization's digital transformation? A, the CEO, B, CTO, or C, COVID-19. And the idea there being that it was the pandemic that accelerated that adoption, and if you are to survive, you had to adopt AI, and it actually gave you the competitive advantage that you need. But on the other hand, AI also played a very big role in tackling the pandemic. I think the most obvious example is in how AI powered the research and development, accelerated the development of the vaccine. Something that could have been, or should have been done over 10 years was done in less than a year. So that alone, I think, is a huge achievement that wouldn't be possible, before that kind of capabilities that we have today. And machine learning models today are being used to, look at all the, potential compounds that can be used to create a cure for the pandemic, which is, I think, something that's, ongoing. Other uses of the AI is like in early warning signs, predicting outbreaks, visualizing trends of disease spread, predicting infection rates. All of that, is powered by the speed of AI, and only possible by the speed and abilities of AI. Something else that I read that I thought was quite interesting, Jarred, is kind of other kind of industries that also started, evolving because of the pandemic. One example that I saw was, these smart watches now that have these biometric sensors, and they measure, your heart rate, your other vitals, levels of blood oxygen, or oxygen in your blood, your movement, and then they take all of this information, and then they can determine whether somebody could be sick before they even know that they are sick, And if you collect enough of that information, then you can start identifying, breakouts of the disease.
So if I can add in there, Zaid, I mean, I also read up an article recently on the smart watches, how it picked up that somebody was going into a heart attack situation, and the watch actually triggered slightly earlier to say that your heart rate has really picked up significantly. And they actually managed to save that person because they got to dial the phone, call the ambulance and everything. And I mean, it's fascinating how all of this has come through this pandemic, and how using all these different data and touch points has helped us actually, if we really think about it. And to your point, I mean, a vaccine to be created in the time that it was versus what it normally takes, all done through predictive analytics. So it's really been useful to everybody. But I mean, everybody says, okay, so we've had this pandemic, we've got all this information now, but how is it actually being used in the banking world and in the financial world? I mean, surely the banks must be doing something with this information. We've heard of payment schemes where banks are saying you don't need to pay, but what does that actually mean? Maybe if you can just explain that to us a little bit better for the people that might not necessarily understand, what does it actually mean to a bank when they say something like that?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So, I mean, aside from how AI and the pandemic and their relationship directly with each other, they've impacted so many other industries. We know that a lot of industries were hurt by the pandemic. And financial services is one of those industries. I mean, a lot of people had reduced pay or lost their jobs. Banks were forced to give their customers payment holidays or deferred payments, and they needed a lot of information to be able to determine who is impacted and what kind of strategy and communication they need to do to support their customers. And the biggest challenge that these banks faced is, okay, how about after that payment holiday or that deferment period ends? How am I going to know which customers can continue to pay, which customers are still struggling? And they needed to imagine, they're dealing with thousands of customers, and they're all impacted in very different ways. So they needed to bring in all of this information, look at potential affordability of each customer, what's their specific situation, and then use all of that information to, for example, determine the right communication or request they need to go to these customers. So some customers, they're going to ask for full payment, because they're capable. Other customers who they've identified as having had a major impact on their lives, maybe they need to determine the right amount to be requesting to slowly bring in all of their customers back to becoming current customers. So, the impact of the pandemic, even drove them even further into adopting data to be able to survive and come out of this. So I think financial services also have been one of the biggest industries to move towards or accelerate their digital transformation because of the pandemic. So really, if you look at it, it's all connected somehow.
Yeah, no, I mean, it definitely is all connected, and it's good to hear from somebody that's from us, like that we are actually working in the industry, to see what banks are thinking and how their processes are, and that they are putting the client at the forefront. Because I think the world that we're living in today, it's all about customer experience, and if customers aren't happy, we live in a world where it's so easy that they can just change institutions overnight and they can move to somebody else. So it's vital that everybody does get this right, and that banks use this information to best help the client. And I mean, in our interactions that we've seen so far, that is what is actually happening out there. They're looking what is the best that they can do for our clients, for the consumer out there. So it's really interesting to hear that. I think the question which comes up next is thinking beyond the pandemic. So, I mean, a lot of people are saying, is the future here already? I've also seen in some of the questions that are coming through on the question and answer box, people asking, what is next? Where is this all going? How is it being used in some different elements out there today? So I don't know, maybe you could just have a discussion a little bit about where we've seen AI being applied and what it's actually being used for today. I think earlier on, Zaid, I mean, we were chatting to you about the sports star that's been using it. Mm-hmm. So I think there are a few examples, you can go through. So maybe do you want to give us one or two examples where it's been used?
Yeah, so this is, a really interesting discussion, about the future of AI, because, there's a lot of kind of debates around how much we should be relying on these tools. On one hand, let's take the example of China. AI tools are used a lot in surveillance and face recognition, and they were used a lot during the AI to control crowds and make sure that, there's control over, who, especially when they are having lockdowns, in terms of movement of people. But other, interesting applications of AI that I thought are worthy of kind of discussion are things like when AI is used in, for example, court sentencing. So there's one example in the US where judges in some states rely on a risk assessment tool that uses an algorithm that predicts the probability of someone reoffending, based on a whole number of criteria. So that's life impacting, and the discussion there is the machine better at predicting, people reoffending because, there's no bias there compared to a human that always has bias in decision making. So, I thought that is one of the areas where, we need to examine, the use of AI and data science, in more detail. But less, life impacting applications, maybe in the not so distant future. You walk into a retail shop, you have, facial recognition, it identifies you, it immediately then offers you, certain products, that appeal to you. It's like, if you remember the movie Minority Report, something similar to that. So, I think that could be somewhere where AI is headed. And something that we might see maybe in this coming Dubai Expo is, autonomous vehicles. And autonomous vehicles really
It's a scary thought, that, but yes.
Yeah. I mean, the discussion is, 90% of accidents today are caused by human error. So it would be interesting to see how autonomous vehicles, how much they reduce, fatalities, and so by how much. But the idea there is that these vehicles, are bringing information from sensors, machine vision, satellite technology, navigation, robotics, all together, and instantly making decisions while the vehicle is moving. So, that is
very interesting. That, I mean, I think I'm going to jump on that bandwagon. I also recently have been involved in looking into a project, just a personal one, where it is around garbage pickup. So there's actually autonomous vehicles which go out. They have built-in sensors that pick up that sense garbage on the side of the roads, and they actually will pick it up on its own, completely no human involved, only with AI. So it's really, really interesting to see how it identifies what is rubbish, what is not, and how it actually picks it up. I mean, it's fascinating what is happening. And I think then, another example, Zaid, that I can give you is it's being used everywhere. And in the sports world, we're so used to statistics being produced. For example, in soccer, you won 2-1. This team had so much possession versus the other team that had X amount of possession, all those kind of insights. But now data and analytics has even gone one step further, where the top professionals, for example, Kevin De Bruyne, who is one of the most influential soccer players out there at the moment, he recently hired a full-on data and analytics team to negotiate his contract for him. I thought that was brilliant how he did it. So what he did is he actually hired this the analytics team, and he said to them, how much better does Manchester City perform while I'm on the field? And he got to prove the fact that while he's on the field, they win more games and they score more goals, and that is why he deserves a bigger increase. And that is why they extended his contract. So it's fascinating how it's being adopted in every aspect of our lives at the moment. That example, I don't think I ever would have thought of. And yeah, we're sharing it and it's happening today. So it's really interesting.
Yeah, and he didn't go through the traditional, route of having an agent and bypassed that and, negotiated his contract directly because, he was armed with all of that information, and it's all about all the different types of data that you can feed into this algorithm that can support, your negotiating power. So I fully agree, and I'm a big fan of him as well.
No, excellent. Okay, so Zaid, I'm gonna there's quite a few questions coming through, and it speaks next to something I wanted to bring up, and this is all fascinating, and there's a lot of data out there, but in the same breath, and I think somebody used the word, it's a double-edged sword. So it is a little bit scary as well, and there's so much information on us as human beings as well that is being used that we don't necessarily want used all the time. So I think maybe let's discuss a little bit around how safe is our data? How ethical is all of this? What is cybersecurity doing? Where do we see this going? And as a consumer, are we protected, and how protected are we? So maybe we can just discuss that. And I think that'll answer quite a few questions which have come through on the question and answer chat box here as well.
Absolutely. And actually, there's a recent documentary on Netflix called Coded Bias that I would recommend people watch, because it touches on that specifically. And you're right. I mean, you can say it's a double-edged sword, and you can also say, with great power comes, great responsibility, because this applies to AI and data science as much as it applies to any other thing that has power. And as we were mentioning, I mean, these algorithms are now determining a lot of aspects of our life, whether you get accepted into a job, there was the Amazon example given, how they use machine learning to hire people. And, whether you're getting a loan, a loan that, you might be dependent on for, a purchase of a house or something. So the impact that they have on our lives is huge, and it will continue to be huge as we depend on them. And then the question becomes, then we need to make sure that if these algorithms are making these decisions need to be done fairly. Okay, so because we don't want to replace one form of bias, which is human decision making, with another type of bias, and another type of bias where you can't negotiate with, or you can't have a two-way conversation with. I think the very famous example that was given is in facial recognition and machine vision, where typically these tools are developed by feeding the machine a lot of huge amounts of data of what are faces and what are not faces, and then you ask it to predict and recognize a face and maybe whether it's a male or female or an ethnic background of that person. And the initial trials of machine vision found that the machine was recognizing white male faces more than it was recognizing female faces or ethnic faces, because the machine learns from what data you feed it. And obviously that started the whole discussion around regulation. How much regulation should we apply on these algorithms and the way that they've been developed, to make sure that they are not just fair but also inclusive? And do we just let them make decisions independently, or is a human element or factor involved as part of that decision making process? So that was kind of a very eye-opening, really kind of documentary for me. And they had one sentence there that kind of stuck with me, that says data is destiny, meaning whatever data you feed into the algorithm is going to start making decisions based on that data, okay, which is going to then decide the decisions that impact your life. So we really need to go back to the roots of what data are we using for these algorithms, who is regulating the type of data that we're using, who is regulating the application of these machine learning models and AI models, and how do we make sure that they're always inclusive and diverse in their application. So fantastic kind of debate, and I think, and I'm to be honest, I'm a big advocate of using data science to enhance our lives. That's the industry I work in, and I'm a very big believer in its power, and I advocate in the automation of so many different things. But at the same time, I'm more of a believer of kind of this augmented decision-making process between human and machine, rather than complete, reliance on machine alone.
And I think on that point there, I think that's where the world is leading more towards. And I think, as I've seen in some of the questions coming through here, is this going to replace jobs and everything? And I think to some degree it might in some places, but there is a balance and a trade-off on all of this. And there will always be a human factor, because what everybody's starting to realize is that we want this augmented view, basically, where it's both human and AI. So let's automate all the stuff that needs to be automated, but the stuff that's coming into the automation will still need to be checked by a human to make sure that it is correct and that we are using it correctly. And I think if we really think about things in the bigger picture as well, data has been around for a few years now, not too many though in the bigger picture, okay? And as it's evolving over time, more and more regulations are coming into play. Different governments are setting up different sections where they are focusing on data. How is data being used? What is allowed to be used? What is not allowed to be used? So I think there is protection. Is it perfect yet? No, most probably not. Do I think everybody's working towards that? Yes, I do. And I think that's important to note. Same as cybersecurity. I mean, Zaid, both of us, we both know that on a daily basis, new things are being released to protect data, protect information, stop hacking from happening. We feel it in our daily lives as well. On everything that we do, there's two-factor authentication now as well. So a whole new world is starting to develop, and there is going to be glitches on the way, but I think it's moving in the right direction, and the protection of all our information and data will hopefully be there sooner than later.
Absolutely. And, look, one of the biggest, kind of recommendations that we give to our clients that are moving towards, becoming data-driven and becoming more dependent on, these predictive models is that we remind them that these models make future predictions based on historical data. As that data change and the world changes, you need to make sure that these models are still relevant and are still predicting with high accuracy, and that these models at the end of the day still have a shelf life that requires you to revisit them and to monitor them and to make sure that they're still performing and they're still fit for purpose. So it's not a case of just developing these models and then leaving them to run your business and make some of the most important core decisions of your organization.
Yeah, and I think that's very relevant, that it's not just a once-off model that gets implemented and it gets left there forever. It needs to be monitored continuously. And I see another question has come through regarding a data lake and the storing of data and information, and how is there security around that, which I think fits in nicely with what we're busy talking about. So I think people also are under the misconception that maybe data is just taken and it is just used, but it's not always the case. I mean, working in the financial industries, we understand that data is stored safely and securely. Only certain people have access to that data, and it needs to be approved by different entities before you can actually go and use it. So there is a lot of procedures in the back end, which I don't think everybody's always privy to know that there is steps in place to protect all the information and data. Yes, sometimes it does get breached, but everybody's working on that so that it does not happen anymore. But I mean, I think it's very relevant what we've just spoken about. So I just wanted to bring that up during this section as well. Okay, great, Zaid. So thanks. I mean, I think we've covered a little bit on the data evolution, the pandemic. What do we think is going to happen post the pandemic? How safe is our data? Do we still all have jobs? I think we've touched on a few of those things. So I think the next section that I just wanted to touch base with you on was a company that is starting out today, or even a company which is quite well advanced. How do they become more data driven? What should their focus be, and how should they tackle this data conundrum that we're all facing today?
Yeah, I mean, look, I mean, we've seen the growing interest in organizations adopting data, becoming data driven, and there are many elements that go into an organization becoming data driven. Technology obviously is a big part of it, but technology is widely available, and I think everybody has access to technology and can purchase the necessary tools that they need. What we found to be a more important element, and funnily enough, because we're talking about AI and machines, is that you need to have the right people in your organization. Exactly. that are driving this strategy. So no matter how complex a project we do for our clients, we make sure that there's always a data engineer that understands data, the cleanliness of the data that's being used. We always make sure that there is obviously a data scientist that can understand how to use these data analytics tools and takes this data to develop a specific model to predict a specific outcome. But then we have a very important role, which we're calling the translators. And these are the individuals that put things into context, so they have the domain expertise. You're dealing with a government department or a telecom, so they understand telecom, understand, maybe if it's a marketing related, project that we're doing, so they understand marketing, they understand telecom, and they help implement these models into the organization in a way that, is fit for purpose, so they are the people that can take what a data scientist does and implement it into an organization. And that implementation for us is key, because this is where, as we said, models could not have been developed using the right data, they're not implemented properly, they're not embedded into your policy on how you make decisions. There's no policy as to how you monitor these models going forward. So these translators or advisors or whatever you want to call them for us are one of the key components in making sure that your data-driven strategy is successful. And then at the end, obviously, you have the software developers or the technical people that make sure that everything that you've done is automated, because at the end of the day, the objective is not to make just more accurate decisions. The objective is to make faster decisions as well. So it's really the human element that we think is one of the most successful components in any data-driven strategy.
No, thank you. I think that makes it a little bit practical for everybody as well, just to understand how to do it. And I think one of the other things that needs to happen in some organizations, which might be starting out on their journey, is just to take that leap of faith and trust the data as well. I mean, there's a transition period where everybody has been running things in a way that they have, and it's fixed, and that's just legacy. But then all this data and information comes in, and it's actually taking that step and trusting the data and information that's coming into you, and then using that there going forward. So I think that's another piece of practical advice that we can share on just how to actually get going with it and move in that direction.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I think we've covered quite a lot there. I've been trying to pick up some of the questions as we go along and incorporate it in the discussion that we've been having. Zaid, I see another question here that has come through is, how do you actually go about explaining AI to people that don't necessarily understand what this all actually means? So what's a nice, simple way to explain it? And I think you gave a great example to me the other day about Alexa, for example. So maybe you want to just explain that to the audience.
Yeah, I mean, that example is one example that I heard, and I thought it was brilliant to kind of create that clarity. But you have narrow AI where you are programming the machine to predict a certain outcome, okay? And then you have general artificial intelligence where the machine actually mimics human intelligence. And the example that I gave around Alexa is one that I heard, and I thought I'll kind of recycle. Is today you can tell Alexa that you want to go on vacation, and you ask Alexa to check your calendar. It checks it. Tell her I want to book a ticket to your favorite destination. She goes and books that ticket. And then you ask her to pay using your credit card, and she can charge your credit card. So that is, AI, but maybe narrow AI, because you are asking, Alexa to do specific things, and it's doing it. But, real artificial intelligence is, a situation where, you walk into your office, and then Alexa says, by the way, I noticed that you haven't taken a vacation for a while. So I looked at your calendar. I booked time for you to go on vacation to your favorite destination. I checked your bank account, and I've already, bought the ticket and booked the hotel. So this is real, kind of artificial intelligence where the machine is acting with the intelligence of a human being.
Okay, excellent. I think that's a great answer, and it makes it very practical for anybody out there that wants to explain to their family what is this hype around artificial intelligence or machine learning. I think that's a great answer just to bring it home to everybody basically. Okay, I'm going to move to some of the questions that have come through. I've been trying to incorporate most of them, but I see another one here that has come through, which I think is interesting and relevant as well. And it just basically says, do we think that excessively using AI only could backfire in certain areas? So Zaid, I'm going to jump in here. And I think what we mentioned earlier and part of our discussion was how there's a balance between using AI as well as human beings. So it's vital that human beings are part of the process, part of the input into the AI, because that ultimately affects what the AI is going to produce. So you also need the human factor at the end of it to monitor what the AI is producing. So for me, it's always a balance, and AI should not just be used completely in isolation, but there should be a balancing factor. So do you have any thoughts on what do you think could AI backfire on us completely and only using AI?
Again, going back to the example of financial services, one of the biggest problems that we face today is financial inclusion. There's a big part of the population that doesn't have access to credit, doesn't have access to banking services. And AI has been key in solving this, because traditionally, you had credit officers or bank managers who they had to assess whether they need to give a loan to a certain individual, and they were driven by their biases or their opinions of the person sitting in front of them. But what AI and data science has allowed us to do is to really look at so many different elements of a particular individual, even if he is of low income or has never had a credit before. Assess his character, assess his capabilities, and bring him into or accept him into kind of the financial services industry, provide him access to more credit so that he can grow, he can invest. So I think that for me is one of the greatest examples of the use of AI and data science to bring people out of poverty. But to answer the question here, I do think that there is a point where if we rely too much on these models, that it could backfire if there is no proper regulation. I think this is a growing industry, and it requires, like any other industry, the governments issue proper regulations on what data can be used, the necessary consents that you need to get to use certain data, for what purpose are you using it, and how can you prove that these models are inclusive, are fair, etc. And as Jarred, one of the biggest problems of using real machine learning or like deep learning is that these models tend to be black boxes. So they make accurate decisions, but we have no idea how did they reach that decision, and whether they reach that decision in a fair way, that doesn't harm anybody. So
Excellent. No, thanks. I think that clarified that question there. I think there's time for one more question, and I think it's an interesting one. So I thought let's do this one. It's around collecting customers' personal information. Is it worth it for the bank from a cost point of view? I think it's an interesting question because does it cost the bank a lot of money to actually get all this information and into their system? And is it beneficial for them? I mean, I'm going to jump in here and start with the answer. I think today, whenever, let's use a bank as an example, or your credit card, and when a credit card gets swiped, I mean, that information is readily available for the banking institutions to use. So there is definitely a bit of a cost to it, but I think the benefit outweighs the cost from both the banking sector as well as the consumer factor, because the consumer then could be given offers which are very specific to them using that information. So again, it goes back to data and how data is used, but if used correctly, for me, I think it is a definite benefit for both the bank as well as the consumer. I don't know what your thoughts are, Zaid.
Yeah, I mean, we've all heard of the saying, data is the new oil, and that didn't come out of nothing. It's because everybody understands the value of the data. So, yes, there's a cost, but a reducing cost in storing data and processing data, because, processing power and computers have become cheaper, and, processing capacities have doubled or double every year. So, that cost is marginally dropping, but the value from collecting that data is very, very high. As you said, the returns on knowing more about your customer, using that data, to have a personal relationship with your customer and treat every customer as an individual. I mean, that benefit is priceless, really. But again, with the caveat that we need to make sure that you're using the right data, that you have the right to use that data, etc. So it's not just about going out and scraping the web for data. You need to make sure that that data is is there for you to use. And I think there's a lot of debate now around that. We know in Europe there's the GDPR, which has puts a lot of regulation around data protection and use of data. But maybe that needs to be something that we see in all countries and regions.
No, excellent. And I think you've covered it nicely there. But using data beneficially for us, as we've seen, it's helped us through a pandemic. It helps us in the banking world, in the financial world. I mean, different examples in the sporting world were mentioned as well. It's helped in different cases when it comes to fraud, which is something we haven't spent much time on today, but using and detecting fraud as well. So I think the benefit is definitely there. And again, responsibly using this data and information is what it boils down to, but the benefit definitely outweighs the cost in getting that actual data in there. Excellent. I think there's 2 minutes left. So I don't know if that's enough time for another question. So I think we're going to close out there. So, I mean, just before we actually close out the session, Zaid, thank you very much for your time today. I think it's been a really great conversation. And I hope everybody got some good insights into all of this discussion that we had today. I'd also just like to, again, thanks to Mohammed bin Rashid Knowledge Foundation and the United Nations Development Program, as well to Iyad for supporting this webinar as co-host behind the scenes. So there's a lot of work that goes into these behind the scenes. Iyad's been very busy with that and helping us out with that. So big thanks to him as well. But then also, I just want to say a big thank you to all the attendees today. I mean, without you, this isn't possible. I hope that you enjoyed this virtual event and you gained some useful insights that will help you and your company take some bigger steps forward on your advanced analytics journey. As I mentioned before, this webinar will be available to rewatch on YouTube. So yes, just a big thank you to everybody. And depending on your time zone, I just want to wish you all a good morning, good day, or a good evening ahead. Thanks very much, everybody.